welcome to our panel discussion. Thank you for being here. We have a fun discussion in store for you, and we have a great group of speakers. Why don't you guys come on all out, take a seat. We have a great group of speakers, and we're going to get to introductions in a minute. But to give you an idea of what to expect, the goal here, as advertised, Big Thinkers Tackle Burning Questions, is to really dive into and tackle some big weighty questions that are sort of overhanging all of the things in what I like to call the spatial spectrum. So we're going to get right into it. Why don't we first do some introductions, self-introductions, yourself and your role. Ted, let's start with you. We'll go down the line.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to chat with you. We're all friends and colleagues, so this is going to be an interesting discussion.
Yes.
I am the futurist at the newly minted Paramount Global, which has a 100-plus year history. You may know it from its previous moniker of Viacom CBS. It's now called Paramount Global, which encompasses brands like CBS Sports, CBS News, CBS Primetime Television, Nickelodeon, MTV, VH1, BET, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So it's a very large media organization, and my job is to explore the future of media across the whole organization.
That sounds like a fun job, and a lot of people call themselves futurists. It's actually in your title.
It's actually a real, it's my job. It's actually my gig.
Yeah. Catherine.
Thank you. I'm Catherine D. Henry. I am SVP of Web3 Metaverse and Innovation Strategy at Media.Monks. We're one of the world's biggest and most successful digital media agencies that does everything from advertising, marketing, branding, straight through to production.
So you're seeing firsthand the brands out there, how they're adopting all this stuff. We're going to dive into that, and we look forward to that. Yeah. Alvin?
Hi, I'm Alvin Graylin. I'm HTC China president, but I also serve on the VRVCA Virtual Reality Venture Capital Alliance as their president and vice chair of the Industry VR Alliance. So I get to see a lot of industry activities, both from startups and kind of fairly mature companies. And I've been exposed to XR, VR since 1991, so a few years.
Yeah, and you have a firsthand perspective of everything that's happening in China. Here in the US, we tend to be very Western focused, so we're gonna be excited to hear about sort of what's happening in China and the temperature there, and if it matches what's happening here. Charlie.
Hey, I'm a Forbes tech columnist, college professor, author, podcaster. I don't know, I may have left out a couple of jobs.
Futurist.
Pastist. Every futurist is a pastist.
Visionary.
Yeah. Okay, good. So what we're gonna do here is actually, as I mentioned, we're gonna have these sort of big topics we're all gonna jump into. So the first one is something that is sort of on everyone's mind. If we can get that screen.
I see it here.
There we go. And to the AV folks, we don't have to focus on these slides for very long, but just to give the audience an idea. So anyway, Apple AR glasses. Everyone's wondering that. Not just the what and when, which I give you guys the opportunity to jump into any predictions of what you think it will be, but also, if you prefer, what the impact will be, regardless of what they release. Apple has a track record in sort of their halo effect in terms of mainstreaming emerging tech, and that tends to rise all boats. Will that help us all? So I guess you can kind of take any, that was a big long question with many parts, so take any piece of that you'd like. Charlie, why don't you go first, because you've been thinking a lot about this.
Well, Ted and I do a podcast together. I tried to get out of the panel because I'm like, am I going to spend the whole panel agreeing with Ted? So I'm going to bounce it back to Ted, because he really has some insight into Apple and is an old Apple insider.
Yeah.
So
I've spent my whole career in various ways having some sort of connection to Apple.
So you know how they think.
Right, and a little bit, yeah. I mean, and have had a number of companies that were sort of tied to Apple in various ways. It's a story for another day.
Yep.
But to your big question here, which is sort of the elephant in the room, the giant elephant in the room, I think a valuable sort of talking point, Charlie and I talked about this, is if you take the equation just of the specific device and go into a little bit of the philosophy of Apple and study a little bit about what Apple does with effectively all of their product launches.
Sure.
When there are new things on the horizon that have yet to really find where their consumer sort of adoption point will be, Apple will let others stumble around in the dark for many, many years and watch and learn and iterate. Stop, take a breath, watch and learn and iterate again, and they'll do this for extended periods of time until, and secretly they'll put huge amounts of resources into figuring out how to solve not the technology equation, but the human equation. How will humans interact with something that is different than what they do today? And we've seen this 5 or 6 times in recent memory with Apple product launches, and we will likely see this again at some point in the near future.
And there are a lot of clues that they're somewhere in that journey right now, right?
And there's a lot of press fodder, and there's rumors, and there's all these things that sort of come out.
WWDC is next week.
Right, and
We
I'll
probably
be there,
won't
and
see.
who knows, right? But you know, when you sort of look at the question, the what and the when, the what is when it's ready, and the when is when it's ready, and that's the answer.
But can I just say something? This is. I mean, I'm so glad that Robert Scoble is not this, because he would just go rant on and on about it coming out tomorrow and it's going to take over the world. But this is the thing. It's been like 15 years since we had that iPhone moment. Have we given too much credit to Apple for what they're doing? I mean, I really feel like we're in a meta moment, but we're also in a moment in history when users are creating so much content that's really flipped the story. So you can iterate all you want, but the real drivers behind this are the content creators. So when I look at things like Snap and TikTok, I am super excited to see what the creators are doing. And the sooner that we have these creator tools and we integrate them with glasses and a virtual positioning system, that's when we start to see the magic happen. So we don't know if really the future and the power is in their hands. I did a 50-page report with comparing all of these different headsets last year. I'm doing another one this year with even more of these headsets, because at the end of the day, they're all very similar, but it's the content that's going to make the difference.
No doubt.
In B2C.
Alvin, based on that, where do you see the room to differentiate as a hardware provider, given that, if Catherine's theory is right, the software and the user creation is where the sort of magic lies?
Yeah, I agree with Ted, actually. They're probably going to take longer than what Scoble is saying. But if you look at actually 4 years ago, we actually worked with Apple. They, on their WWDC stage, used the Vive as their demo of the VR experience. So we've had some interactions with them. And, you know, everybody, you're talking about AR glasses. I think AR glasses are still a little ways away from true consumer commercialization. And as Ted mentioned, they're not going to come out until it's ready. So they're not going to be the first ones to come out with commercial glasses for AR. So I think that's probably not the case. But I think the beauty of what they will do is what they've already been doing on the phone side, is that they've essentially educated thousands and thousands of developers to create content for AR. And probably in the next month or weeks, they will come out with some more development kits that will get more and more people to develop AR-related, VR-related content. And honestly, I think longer term, AR and VR are going to integrate into common devices. So we don't really have to have as much of this conversation today of, like, you know, whether it's going to be an AR glass or a VR glass, because within 10 years, there will be a device that, you know, looks like glasses that will have both functionality. It will last all day. You can, just with a button or with a voice command, switch it between these modes. And it's most of the development tools and most of the underlying hardware technology will be the same between those two modes. Yeah. So if they can get thousands of developers to start building things in Unity and Unreal and whatever engine that they want, it will actually create a much wider pool of content for all of the other companies who are building devices today that are either released or will soon to be released before they actually come out with their mature, fully usable device.
Getting back to the sort of examining the persona of Apple as a sort of leading indicator of what they might release. One thing they often do is they have a fiduciary responsibility to shoot for major markets. So I probably should have explained better on this slide, when we're talking about AR glasses, not necessarily the Magic Leap style UX where you have sort of full occlusion and dimension with the world, but Apple could probably do something that is simpler. I like to call it light AR, where it is basically enhanced vision. Charlie, you're a glasses wearer, someone who will actually wear a pair of glasses as opposed to a geeky big headset that has elegant integrations with other iOS devices or ROS devices, the magic in the sort of continuity and that experiential thing that Apple can do that isn't necessarily tied up in massive specs or graphically rich UX. It could be something along those lines. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I won't be using AR glasses unless they include vision correction.
Yeah.
And the more friction that is in the way of vision correction, for example, Magic Leap 1, oh look, here's a little holder, send it to your optician with your prescription, and $600 later they'll give you some custom thing to spend 2 hours in the Magic Leap. So unless you give me vision correction, there's really nothing to talk about.
Right.
And 50% of the people in the world wear these things. problem number one. So, I mean, we're not just talking about technology, we're talking about people's behavior.
Yeah.
Right? So, and you have to think of it this way. The benefits have to be greater than the friction.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of friction in all day, every day AR glasses. Glasses that you use outside of your living room, right? You have to charge them, they have a case, you're still gonna carry these with you, right? You can't risk you wouldn't be able to drive. So, you know, there's a lot of friction here that we're talking about. So I always pivot back to, okay, what are the benefits that are gonna make not just me, because I'll tell you, I'll be first in line for the Apple glasses. I don't care what they cost. I don't care that they're not ready. Because we're all in the business. We're gonna be the first adopters. But in terms of a normal person seeing the benefits in this, the one thing that was exciting to me about Google's introduction, or they teased a version of the North glasses that was doing, translation.
Language translation.
And it was one of those things that I said, that makes sense.
That's a use case.
If I was traveling, right, I might put those in my bag, and even though they didn't do vision correction, if I'm having dinner with a friend where vision correction isn't that big deal, and then seeing what they're saying, I mean, that's a pretty big benefit.
Yeah.
So, I think for Apple to really become that kind of an intimate watch-like experience with glasses, a lot of the friction has to go away, and the benefits have to be brought forward and made easily apprehensible to anybody.
What's the addressable market of glasses wearers? It's probably massive. It's a lot.
50%.
Yeah.
So 3 billion people.
4.5 billion people.
Yeah, that goes back to big markets, right? If they can tap into that market as opposed to the people that are interested in AR glasses.
Apple does have a very compelling patent about this, where they use retinal scanning, outward-facing cameras, and AI to know not just what you're looking at, but the context. You're driving, but it's night. You're reading, but it's dark. And make all those, so it's sort of like the old photo sensitive lenses that sort of
changes the opacity.
Sunglasses.
The retouching effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Changes the
But
opacity.
these would be real, not a joke.
That's the light AR approach.
There's also another technical subset of this, of the video pass-through concept of mixed reality versus the optical glass style pass-through. And Alvin, this is something obviously that's near and dear to your heart. But there's a pretty big unknown as to when you talk at what Apple will do, what Google will do next, or what Microsoft will do next, and we know that what we lovingly call as the artist formerly known as Facebook, called Meta, is up to with Project Cambria, their code name for a very high resolution video
full color
style mixed reality experience. There may be in the near term more utility and more value for a visor-like device like that than a glasses-like device that isn't quite ready for, when a company like Apple's got to go, it's got to go prime time, right? And it can't really be on the sidelines. Although we could see for the first time, because of the market at large, that they do have a slightly different tack this time.
And in entertainment context, you get much better contrast with pass-through as opposed to full see-through.
Correct.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Add a point to that. Like something like this, which is sort of between a glasses.
Alvin's got all his props.
Nice, we have props.
Between a glasses and a headset, and these actually have cameras, so we can do pass-through on this, right? And you have things like Vario, which have full, supposedly retina level pass-through. So you can do pass-through as a way to, to achieve kind of near-term AR with very high field of view. Because the biggest issue with today's glasses is that they all have relatively small. I mean, even the newer ones are like 60 to 70 degrees, which is still not enough. Right? And then older ones are probably 30 to 40 degrees. And like the north is like 5 degrees. So for you to have that full immersive experience, 100 plus degrees, or like I've seen recently one that was 270 degrees. It's crazy. I mean, you can't get that in a see-through type experience.
Although you do have to give Magic Leap credit where credit is due. Their Magic Leap 2 device, which is now sort of showing for the first time in a
global
public forum,
shading,
is remarkably large field of view for a glasses style device.
And so I'm sorry, I thought you were going somewhere else. Yes, the field of view, the difference, they actually have as part of their demo, hit that button, it'll show you the old field of view. So it really shows you. But also the, I think they call it the global shading, which essentially creates just much higher contrast. which in certain context, entertainment, things like that, you want that high contrast. Right. Okay, so we're not going to get to all these questions clearly, but we're going to do a few of them and then maybe go rogue and find out a little bit more about what all these folks are up to. But anyway, so this is the second one. Actually, I'm going to skip this one because we're talking about Apple, right? And if we pan back to sort of the big five, so that's Apple, Meta, Amazon, who else? Microsoft, and who am I missing?
Tencent.
Google.
That's another one you want to miss. Anyway, so they're all primed for like different strengths, different assets, different sort of data. I'll kick this one off in saying not just who's best primed, but I'll sort of take a contrarian approach because we were just talking about Apple. Apple, of course, is great with their halo effect, with their sort of elegant integrations between their devices and the continuity. But one thing that is an Achilles heel for Apple that we don't often talk about is Siri. Whatever sort of device we have is going to have an intelligent layer. Charlie, you talk about this all the time, a filtration system, a digital assistant, something to kind of filter the incoming signals. If that's Siri, good luck.
I don't think it's Siri as we've seen Siri. Does everybody remember the 2015 commercial, 14 commercial, Martin Scorsese is in the back of a cab, and Siri is making an airline or changing an airline reservation for him, which is, I don't even know if that actually can be done, but my own experience with Siri suggests probably not so much.
But anyway, I don't mean to slam Apple, but just to tee up this question of, the other sort of big five, who's sort of best positioned or not, who's maybe primed for a fall from grace. Alvin, one thing we were talking about before was how, in this next era, are there any companies or perhaps sectors that then become obsolete? So I guess you guys can take that in any direction in terms of like the companies that are sort of the dominant sort of incumbents, the pantheon of tech players now. How are they positioned?
Well, it's funny, Mike, because even in your question, you've forgotten really a couple big players, and those are the Chinese players.
Absolutely.
Tencent was not on your list, and these are exactly the kinds of things that we need to start focusing on because that's where we're going to see a lot of the innovation over the next few years. And
Great point.
I'm perfectly willing to state publicly that I think the metaverse is being built first and foremost in China in an interoperable way.
By the way, I think that was the first time.
That, actually.
Absolutely, that was the first time. I just want to mark that. The first time I think the word metaverse was said, and that's 14 minutes and 1 second.
The Chinaverse.
Who had 14 minutes and 21 seconds?
As a bet, as a running bet.
I'm just kidding.
Let's make up for it now.
I'm just kidding. But Alvin, you want to say
in terms of the Tencent, I actually think it should be very noted because it is the #1 gaming company in the world. It is the by far, right? So it has huge libraries and 50,000 engineers. So and they recently actually created a team specifically trying to create a metaverse solution, right? So whatever that means right now. But I think there are definitely a few other companies around the world that should be recognized. But I think the other thing is, right now these companies are seen as the leaders because they're multifunctional. I think what will probably happen is a lot of these companies will start to focus on a particular piece of the various layers or stacks it takes to create the metaverse. And I don't think any one of these companies will own the metaverse.
That's exactly what I was going to say because you have, Amazon has a cloud business. And it's going to be a huge beneficiary as metaverse infrastructure starts to be built out. The amount of compute that we need to have a metaverse is, we have a fraction of that on Earth right now. So Amazon has the cloud business. Google has the maps business. Whatever they do with glasses is a sideshow to maps, which is in effect a digital twin of the physical world. Niantic, which I wouldn't leave out of this either, has a digital twin of the physical world. The metaverse contains that digital twin of the physical world, and we will be able to go back and forth between them depending on the devices that we're wearing. Meta, I know that there's a lot of shade being thrown toward them. They can't stop doing bad things. That is unfortunate because I love the Quest. I think they're doing great things. Everybody I know there is a really good person. So I don't know how the company keeps doing stupid things. It's sort of like, who is in the room? Because it can't be anybody that I know.
Are they doing stupid things? I think it's unfortunate and unfair. I think that the Meta is doing tremendous things and really deserves to be.
Yes, and so I think we are headed sort of in a certain respect to a duopoly like we have with mobile phones, where on one side you have the Android solution being put forward by Meta, and the other one is going to be the solution put forward by Apple. And the two are not going to be any more interoperable than the smartphones are.
Okay.
I also think there's an interesting piece, and I think a lot of the reason that people gather at this conference is not to necessarily just look at the big 5 or the big 10,
Sure.
but look at who's on the fringes, who's on that emerging cusp of something that will actually become the next big player, which happens with every real technology revolution.
Which is the next question.
This gets
Right? There you go.
Well,
Teed up the next question.
Yeah. You mentioned, Catherine, you mentioned TikTok. When we get into this question, that was going to be my vote.
There you go.
Because their global scale, of course, is huge, but their AR has been underdeveloped.
And a really
They just
important
launched it.
But where they were before about 3 weeks ago was where Snap sat before it launched Lens Studio. TikTok now has Effects House, which really crowdsources and scales up all that lens creation. And to your point, it's all about the creation.
And I cannot wait to jump in. I'm
Yep.
super excited about it. For me, this is the tail that wags the dog.
Yep.
Of course, my focus being in branding and marketing. That's really, I'm obsessed with what consumers and Gen Z and the next generations are doing. So these changing consumer behaviors are, to me, the things that are responding to technology, but also pushing the boundaries. It's kind of like edge creation, if you will.
Totally.
So I'm super excited about that. And I also believe that, Snap is doing some interesting things, but at the share price that it is, I wouldn't be surprised if there were, some interesting offers being made to acquire it. I'm going to spread that rumor now.
That's a good prediction.
Because it sells.
They are undervalued at this point.
It's way undervalued for the kind of cutting edge technologies and
A lot of companies are undervalued right now.
and the connections they're making with consumers.
So let's dig deeper too into some of your perspective, because you get a first row seat into sort of brand adoption. I think a lot of this is the gating factor is, we all sort of talk about this stuff and we geek out about it and it's very exciting, and then users are using it, but how are brands? I guess it's a very broad question because it depends on which brands, but I guess maybe what I should ask is, with the brands you work with, who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong in terms of the way they're thinking about adopting it into their brand strategies? And what would you recommend to this audience if there's anyone on that side of the equation?
Who's doing it right? I'm absolutely happy to share. Who's doing it wrong? You can forget about it. But I think that there are a lot of brands that are doing it right. Really excited about what brands like Nike are doing. They've really committed to it. I can't wait to see what Disney does. So that's really exciting because you've got such rich IP and there's so much that can be done, especially across multiple worlds. I would like to see them move beyond gaming, and Ted and I were talking about this before, about the content. You go to a lot of the social worlds, and I was speaking with the folks at Meta about this about a week or two ago. It would be really exciting to see much more done in terms of taking IP. And we're seeing that in the NFT space, of course, with Yuga Labs. They're now thinking about bringing this into social worlds. And that's a fascinating development that I did not foresee. And so I think that there's some really rich opportunities to continue to tell stories. And not forget that this is not just a gaming platform. So the emergence of these hybrid entertainment platforms, I think, is really important. But we have to put stories back into these experiences.
And so while we're on this question too of sort of smaller players, I wouldn't call them smaller, but I guess tier 2 with respect to some of the big 5. But what about game engines? We're talking about content and content creation.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that we did a gamified experience a couple of weeks ago with Roblox, but it was Lenovo. So Lenovo, we had like a flying mouse car and stuff, but it really wouldn't necessarily seem like a logical fit, but it really made a lot of sense for that brand, and it really tapped into a generation that's still enthusiastic, getting their first computers and getting to know this new brand. So that was a really fun collaboration that we worked with.
And it seems like we're so early, so brands have to sort of develop their own competency and feel their way around, and the ones that are experimenting now will sort of develop that early competency ahead of their competitors. Would that be fair to say?
Exactly. So this is a one-off experience, but we had over 8 million views in Roblox. And so it was a really fun way for them to dip their feet into this, but they also did something really edgy. We had the first music awards show in the Metaverse, and I worked on this project with them, and it was so much fun because I could see this as really the very germ of a plant of new IP, of new entertainment. And as being very participatory and very proactive. And then the revenue streams, on the other hand, the profits to be made from these are significant. In some previous concerts, you make 1.7 million per concert in the case of Ariana Grande, but one performance in in Fortnite can bring you 20 million.
Yeah.
So it really pays off to take these kinds of risks as well.
Yeah.
So
One thing
go ahead,
I do
Alvin,
want to
please.
point out a little bit. I feel like sometimes people conflate the current gaming like Roblox or Fortnite with the metaverse, or they conflate a Decentraland or Sandbox with a metaverse. And the reality is that all of these are currently walled garden solutions, and not really the destination of where we want to get to.
I agree.
And I think a lot of also people are saying, oh, if I buy land, I'm done something in the metaverse, right? Or if I minted an NFT. So we really need to make sure either from a branded kind of interaction perspective or from a events perspective that we try to get to the goal of a more open metaverse. Because I think that's when you have a sustainable metaverse, just like the first closed walled gardens on the internet of AOL, CompuServe, and Prodigy. We don't hear those names anymore. Right?
Yeah.
So I think all of the names I named earlier are kind of those type of companies today. They may exist in 5-10 years in a different form, but they're not going to be called the metaverse. They're going to be called a corner or world or something of the metaverse.
I would agree. The marketplace is one of the first things I tell brands is platform is one of the most important decisions you can make. So do your homework, because don't just walk in and say, I want to do something on Roblox or Decentraland because you heard that's the place to go. We really want to understand what you want to do, but most importantly, we want to really tap into the consumer passion on that platform and those behaviors and give them something to do, but something that's really rewarding.
And there are restrictions in some platforms, what they'll even let you do within their space.
Absolutely.
And rightly so.
Every platform has their own affordances as well. So that's the thing. I encourage people to look at some of the marketplaces and go, okay, well, why don't you go in there and see who's there? Talk to people. And a lot of the times they find a lot of bots.
So Alvin, your point about interoperability, I think that's sort of the magic word, and everyone's agreeing that this thing we're calling a metaverse is going to need to have that. And I think we've enjoyed that on the web because when the web was created, there wasn't the need to get together all these giants to agree upon common standards, which is what we're going to have to do to get that. So, I mean, that's the one point of skepticism I have, is not just the sort of technology in getting there, but getting everyone to sort of play ball together. What do you think about that?
Well, I think with any network, the value of the network, according to Metcalfe's law, is the square of the nodes. Right?
Network
so in a closed system, you automatically have less nodes. And less nodes means less value. So in the short term, there's huge benefits of having a closed system because you can move quickly. But if you start having more and more open systems that have 10 times, 100 times more people, you're going to have 1,000 times or 10,000 times more value.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to open up their system. People will be encouraged, or these companies and platforms are going to be encouraged to move themselves onto this open platform. So
that's the best answer I've heard of that question yet, because it's actual incentive, right? It's business incentive. It makes business sense for them to think of it that way.
Initially, they won't, because it's where they're going to get the biggest profit. But market forces will force them to that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ted.
It's just this near-term versus long-term balancing act, this IWire Act.
Absolutely.
That all these companies that are very publicly talking about this sort of utopian aims of the metaverse, this cross-collaboration, we can move everything in and out of everything. The reality check of that is far away, if ever.
Yeah.
And even in today's version of cyberspace or the internet or the information superhighway, all the reference points of the past,
You
which are
reached into the
effectively
90s for that one.
just replacement words for the metaverse. Right?
Back to the future.
There'll be a new word in a few years.
Yeah, so metaverse just the word. So
Yeah.
I like cyberspace because it's interesting, sort of
one of my
reflective, right?
Yeah.
Reflective.
That's the
But
World Wide Web.
When a company has profit motives to keep a walled garden in a viable state to make profit from it and keep others in their world versus other worlds, but are publicly stating that they actually want to lower those walls, you're kind of in this interesting gelatinous state of what these companies can actually do. But Alvin is largely correct, and people that are really studying it understand the network effect and understand when you talk about things like hyperlinks and HTML5 and the ability to move from pretty much any browser you want and open that website is very different than today's sort of video versions of the metaverse, where if Charlie and I were on Zoom and a friend of us was on FaceTime or Skype, we can't just bring him in, right? He has to join our platform, we have to join their platform.
Sure.
So it will evolve, but it's going to take sort of a rejiggering of a lot of that.
Now, one thing I do want to
point out is I think there will be one place where this will probably happen in a more holistic way, which is probably China.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what Catherine referred to earlier, because of both the ability for the government to enforce policy, as well as the ready availability and acceptability of using real ID systems. So you have a common ID that you can use across all the apps. You have a common currency, which is the digital RMB. And then you have a population that is pretty willing to use and be surveyed.
Yeah.
And you have companies who will fully follow the laws of the land. So, which means that you will, within a few months of China deciding, okay, this is the rules and the standards and the protocols, all the companies who are operating in that space, if you want to be on the China internet or metaverse, you will follow that.
They'll get there first because
they
of all
will
those
get
reasons.
it first, and then the people of China will get the value of that interoperability. And then the rest of the world will be like, oh, I kind of want that. Like, they're much more efficient. Now they don't have to install 5 apps to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about that with WeChat, right? And WeChat is kind of this universal app that
it's
does
super app.
effectively
everything. Yeah.
And we don't really have that in the West,
Right.
but they have that in China for sure.
And we already saw a precursor of this in Estonia in the 1990s. When they first seceded from the Soviet Union, they decided that they wanted to become, the cyberspace, and so they enabled access to the entire community, and they started, by the entire community, I mean from very young to older people, onboarded them all into the internet, and so now all of their public services are online, all of their records are online, everything that they do, and as a result, the economy has really flourished there, and they're home to one of the countries with the highest per capita rate of unicorns. So it really does pay substantial benefits, and I think that China is really in a pole position to outstrip us in many respects.
So Alvin, in China, all of those sort of pieces are in place. It's a fascinating viewpoint because they'll get there first because all the the building blocks are more conducive. The soil is more fertile there for that. What about the sort of culture? Is Metaverse mania, as Charlie calls it, is it happening there culturally?
It's actually happening more so than here.
Okay.
Yeah.
In fact, if you go on Google Trends and you type in Metaverse and then you look at the countries, China is number 1. Number 2 is like Hong Kong, number 3 is Taiwan. So and I think Singapore is number 4 or something. So it's that Asia kind of China region is a very open to this topic, and it's part of news every day. I can tell you that, so there's interest, and there are companies who want to take advantage of this trend. And the readiness of the technology to be enabled because of the government policies. I think it's really set up that it will be probably the first place in the world that allows you to have that full metaverse experience, at least on a regional or country basis.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen cities like Shanghai, Guangzhou, they've already declared themselves metaverse cities, and they're actually implementing this within the government. But we're also seeing on the trademark side some 20,000 trademarks being filed. They have the world's most advanced AI system in the world, with also the highest number of patents. So we can see that the groundwork has all been laid, and it's really exciting. You also told me in a previous conversation how business is using VR much more rapidly, adopting it much more rapidly than in the US.
Yeah, I think that's actually a big difference between the marketplace in China here versus here, is that in the US, it's very gamer focused, it's consumer focused, probably 70-80% of the sales. Whereas in China, it's completely the opposite. It's about 70-80% of total market is in the B2B sector.
The enterprise, right. Charlie and I talk about that all the time, the success of enterprise.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, let's delineate here too and define, when we're talking about sort of the metaverse as this sort of monolithic thing, and I think the common connotation is what we're talking about now, which is sort of connected, synchronous online worlds. But I think it's equally exciting, and we sort of alluded to it already with Google and Niantic, if we're looking at sort of a real world metaverse. And Charlie, this gets to a question for you, which is, the world being painted with data that can trigger information all around us, captions in the world, storefronts telling you what's inside and their Yelp review and all these kind of things. So you coined that term a few years ago. Where are you in the thinking now?
The world is not quite painted with data yet.
Right.
And part of it, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in this conversation. So before I jump on that, let me hit on a couple of
Go for it.
really quickly.
Yeah.
One thing, as you know, I've been researching Web3. I didn't do it willingly. It's very hard for an old guy to absorb new ideas. But I think that is going to disrupt the big players, and I think it's going to be very significant. I think right now, the whole thing is a mess and a wash with bad UX and charlatanism, and it is a dangerous place for regular investors and consumers to be. But it is a technology that has huge disruptive potential. So let me give you an example. It's a protocol, right? It's rules that allow transactions to take place between people without an intermediary. And it doesn't, when you first say that, sound like such a huge deal, except when you start to think about disrupting the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which would be a $14 billion a year business. So the company that can do that can be the next Google or the next Facebook.
Yeah.
And so I think that, so when we talk about what's going to happen to that, group of 5 or 6, companies that basically dominate tech right now, I think there is the potential for there to be a new company that, or one of those companies innovating with this technology that could be so disruptive.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Obviously we see artists doing it, and it has something to do with NFT marketplaces. NFTs have kind of gotten mixed up with tokens, and there's no room on a stage to go into that. It's like a 2,000 word chapter in a book I'm writing. So, but I think that that's an area of disruption that is coming and not well understood.
Do you think these big tech giants are as aware?
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
And do you think that they're going to work the system to their advantage to maintain their ownership stake while giving the illusion of decentralization?
Because all disintermediation recoagulates.
Right.
So I don't know whether that's a permanent state or a disruptive moment.
Yeah.
But I think that these are very smart people, and we know a lot of them. Of course they know about the disruptive potential of Web3. What their strategies are going to be for dealing with it, especially because in the near term it could be disruptive to existing business models. It's hard to say because this is like internet technology in the 80s.
Charlie, it's funny that you say this because I worked in finance for 15 years in emerging technology, and I'm with you that they see the disruptive potential because obviously, as an economist, I'm low-key terrified, having done a fair amount of research on DeFi myself. But on the other hand, I'm not so sure how prepared they are. And I'm going to say because I don't think the world was prepared for this great leap forward that we experienced over the past 2 years. And so from my perspective, and we work with a couple of institutions, financial institutions, governments, et cetera, they're still playing catch up.
Yeah.
Because the question is, what is the roadmap ahead? And to your point, we have to create some sort of infrastructure that will allow for that kind of exchange. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. There is no standard. So there is opportunity for somebody else, the third party, to
And
come
that
up.
is why Andreessen is investing $4.5 billion at the beginning of a tech recession to pursue it, because the opportunity is like an internet size.
So it goes into the core of that innovator's dilemma, which we all know and love, right? Is the small companies that can actually innovate versus the large entrenched companies, which were the innovators a generation ago, have a completely different business model. And while there might be really smart people and smart leaders in there saying, we have to blockchain our whole thing, we have to remove all of these gates and layers and do something new, the entrenched business model, which is in some cases companies that have trillion-dollar valuations, it's going to be really hard to do that.
Exactly.
Whereas small little companies with new business models, to your point about the charlatans, there will be many of those that are popping up all over the place. But when you get the right ones doing the right things and people gravitate to them. But then the second question dives in the world of these tech giants, will any of them be allowed to survive long enough, or will they be so attracted to get bought out by those big tech giants that they can't actually rise up?
But here's an interesting
very different
but
environment today.
we saw this already happen with Robinhood about a year ago when all the public was trying to prop up some dead stocks, right? There's exactly. But then the lashback from financial institutions was so heavy, and it just showed you how threatened they were.
But then they all did a version of Robinhood, right?
Of course.
So they all now have their own E-Trade, and Charles Schwab and everybody have their version because they learned they have to keep up. They can't just let these small guys out innovate.
But it just shows you that it can
we got to
happen.
be a little bit careful.
We're going all over
I think
That's good. It's great.
with the whole Web3 thing, right now we have thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of coins, right? Where at the end of the day, you may have 1 or 2 or 3 left. So you're going to have a really, really high mortality rate. So we need to be very, very careful in terms of promoting too many people to go into that business because most of them are going to fail.
It's
I would
the beginning of the beginning.
Don't recommend it.
You know, I think it's going to play out over the next 10 years. I don't think this is, and I didn't mean to take us straight down the Web3 rabbit hole, but the idea of disrupting these big companies today is very different than it was 20 years ago.
Because
no one is going to be allowed
Yeah.
to be Instagram and not get acquired.
That's true, and consolidation is a given. I mean, that's just part of any nation's industry. So,
Yeah.
But
actually,
that's
one
the key
other
point.
perspective on this I do want to add is that if you look at what happened in China, they actually went the opposite. They made it illegal, right, to issue coins, and they've now issued their central bank digital currency, which like 200 countries around the world is also now investigating central bank digital currency. So the ability to print money and to create value from nothing is a very powerful thing. I don't know if countries longer term are going to allow some private company to say, hey, I'm going to print money, right? So I think the amount of disruption that will actually happen may not be as much as a lot of people have potentially pondered it.
The law tends to trail far behind the technology, right?
That's absolutely true, but I would like to decouple cryptocurrency from the DAOs and other DeFi instruments.
Yeah. So I think blockchain technology, totally agree. There's a lot of value there, but creating currencies and then creating value for yourself for a few founders who then can set aside billions of dollars of value, or potentially in the future $1 trillion of value, right? And so I'm very skeptical in terms of what's going to happen there. And a few bad cases like what happened a couple weeks ago with Luna can really set the entire industry backwards.
But I do think that to Charlie's point, we can expect a disruption of the financial markets and the systems as we know them now, absolutely. And I think it's going to look radically different 10 years from now. And I do believe that it is empowering a lot of people. And I do want to get to the creator economy, if we can talk about that in a minute. But it is empowering a lot of people who wouldn't have had access to some of the financial tools and instruments. And it's actually being fostered by a lot of the community on TikTok. And I actually find that super, super exciting that in a way, finance is being decentralized. And that's going to be for the benefit of lots of people. The creator economy is interesting. And I wonder everyone else's thoughts on the hardware manufacturers and the platforms as gatekeepers to unleashing revenues for creators.
Well, it ties into monetization in DeFi in how all these creators get compensated, correct? So that ties in nicely.
Exactly,
well,
and also tokens.
Well, that's, you were asking me about a world painted with data. Well, who's going to paint the world with data? But we are.
Yeah, it's got to be crowdsourced.
What's the data going to be? Well, it'll be largely social and largely informational.
It's got to be
the
crowdsourced.
Businesses to whom the information pertains will supply that. So you've got a store, you've got a restaurant, you do what you need to do to attract people who have AR to your content. And at the same time, there'll be content there that's placed by people who use Snap, content placed by people who use TikTok. And so that's why I talk about a universal visual browser, because how do I know?
Yeah.
How do I know what is around me and what is relevant to me, right? Because when I go into a restaurant, I don't want to see every picture of food ever taken in that restaurant. I just want to see things that my friends posted. And so when I say there's got to be an AI, it just means what's the back end to the notification system that keeps glasses from being totally interruptive?
Yeah. It has all your preferences like your browser currently does, saves your credit card information like your browser currently does. But that also assumes that the things you're seeing are on sort of a version of the web where there is this abundance of data and not just, I'm in the Yelp app.
I'm actually curious to see about how platforms are going to compensate creators. Because we looked at some of these platforms that take up to 48, 50% of content that's being put out there. So, I know there are a lot of people in the audience who are probably very keen to know what the returns are because they're going to be developing more specific platforms. And until we have more unified tools, that's a really significant contribution in terms of their time and their efforts to build up an expertise in a platform that could go under in a couple of years, could get bought out, could go obsolete. So,
Sure. I mean, there's
one positive factor.
We've been in this social media world, for the past 15 years, where these platforms have benefited from a lot of free content because the content was easy to make, right? TikTok content, you just need a smartphone camera. You know, with Twitter, you just need a keypad. So, you know, that content has been cheap and free. When you are in a spatial environment, now content is hard. And there aren't that, you know, it's not like posting a tweet or posting a picture or even posting a lens effect.
Yeah, you got to know Unity. You have to...
Well, or you've got to have tools like, for example, Horizon has, that allow people to do spatial construction and, you know, in an efficient and time-efficient way, because again, you know, these things are very time-consuming to make.
Well, and all these companies realize that they have to lower those barriers to entry, or it will not be successful.
Correct. That's why you see things like, you know, voice-activated, you know, building
stuff,
assistants,
non-code build stuff, or pre-code build stuff.
But is that stuff going to be any good?
Yeah.
Listen,
so
I
this
just
ties
think
back to your question,
it
Catherine.
changes the power dynamic.
It does. And this comes back to your question because to get that content is going to be harder for the reasons you're saying. Therefore, it's going to be competitive to attract users to the platform. And by doing so, they're going to have to, you know, there's going to be price competition between them. We'll take 30% cut, we'll take 20, and there'll be that sort of race to the bottom pricing where they'll give more to the creator to attract them. And I think that's a good thing, right?
And here's the thing, exactly. I was looking at I was in the TikTok FX House presentation yesterday. Some of these creators got billions of views.
Yeah.
Now, what if they decided actually we're going to move to another platform? So at some point,
Right.
you know, we're really tipping the scales.
They have a lot of leverage.
Metaverse
They're the new
builders
influencers.
It's going to be just like streaming celebrities.
They're going to have
where
leverage.
you have bidding wars between YouTube and Twitch. There will be bidding wars between, you know, VR chat and Horizon to keep the best builders.
Yeah.
Yeah, although I feel like we're still taking the current view in terms of creators. Within 5-10 years, you're going to have AI that can do all of this. And the value of the human interaction or the human involvement will go to almost zero. Right? You have like DALL-E right now. You just say a word. I want a cat that's wearing a hat that's playing with an alligator, and boom, you've got
That thing's amazing.
and it works, right? I mean, or
I want that too.
Or you go to GPT-3 and say, write me a poem about blah blah blah, and it works.
Have
Or
you
write
all
me
used DALL-E?
So
DALL-E
yeah.
2 now?
Yeah, DALL-E 2. I mean, or like 2 weeks ago, Godot came out, and now you have a general agent that can do like 600 different tasks.
Yeah.
Right. So at that kind of development rate, the amount of human interaction involvement will go to very little.
I'm not sure-
I completely disagree.
Yeah, because it's
All right,
it's
we're
a story
disagreeing
that
here.
goes on top of it.
Art is the one thing that AI can't do.
No. I'll send you a video. I'll send you some articles. I think they can do art better than most artists can.
I think there's a lot of great art, but what I would say that it's a storytelling capability. It's how you do it and shaping the challenge. I think that's what, it never cease to be amazed. I can get lost.
Completely agree.
I can lose entire days on TikTok, and I'm just astonished by the
Actually,
creativity.
do you know
that
why
I
you
see
lose
there.
entire days on
Or
TikTok?
Snap.
Because of AI. Because AI,
A great algorithm.
because AI put together a story of 5-second videos that made you addicted. That's why. So it's AI that's doing it, not the individual.
No,
AI
they have no idea.
no,
I have the
no.
most random search because I look at, I'm constantly reading about different people and I do a lot of really weird research and I go down a lot of different directions. So I know about that.
Yeah. In fact, because of this issue, China just recently came out with a law that says people can turn off AI algorithms on their display systems so that you're not being fed a stream that is reinforcing additional action. I think those are the kind of things that we need to think about from a industry and a governmental kind of regulation perspective, because we recently did some research and we found that AI-based NPCs can greatly influence the attitudes and the behaviors of people they interact with.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, what do you think the opt-out rate's going to be? I mean, it's different in everything, but I want Netflix to make suggestions for me. In some cases you want it, some cases you don't, but I'm curious to see what that opt-out rate is going to be.
Yeah, it just happened like a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that as well.
But they don't even do that in Europe when they say, would you like to, click to agree my choices. Everyone still opts in, which is crazy. I'm really more concerned about advertising because, of course, working with people who are used to demanding ROI for activations, they want to know what they can get out of it. And there's actually a lot of rich data. The closer these things come to our pulses, our eyes, our
biometrics.
Yeah, I mean, we all know everybody here, but I don't really talk about it too much outside because I actually don't want them to know too much.
Yeah.
I want them to really think about, the the engagement that they're giving and the amount of time that people are spending in this space, as opposed to really absorbing all this biometric data and then feeding them something in response. I want to turn that and split and really focus on the entertainment value.
Something interesting has happened in all the privacy reform, and this strays a little bit from XR, but the sort of budget shifts. We're seeing more in like streaming and things that are contextual ad targeting as opposed to behavioral ad targeting. But as we go into this sort of XR era, you're right that the sort of tracking signals coming from our eyeballs and our just every sort of sensory input could start to.
I really need to emphasize that we should not make.
We're talking in today's terms.
Yeah, we should not be making advertising the primary revenue model for the metaverse.
I agree.
I think that's right.
And so
Here.
So
Here.
And all the activities that are happening today, all the algorithms is about creating attention, getting you to stay there and just watching because they want to feed you more.
It incentivizes bad behavior.
Yeah. And we don't want, and here's the other sad thing, the thing that we also did in advertising research is 7 times more interest doing VR ads versus 2D ads, and it's 2 times to 3 times more action based on those interests.
Yeah.
Right? That's huge. And then it's 4 times more retention. So if some bad actor wants to use VR to advertise you, to change your impression, your perspective, your behavior, it is so easy to do.
So do you think that, I mean, it's a good and solid statement, but the reality dynamic on top of that is, do you think the worldwide population is ready to pay for things that they have a perception should be free? Creepy line free, but free, right? They're very comfortable with the idea that they don't have to write a check or put their Apple Pay or their Android Pay in every month for these services, and they're happy for these ad layers. Do you think that there's a cultural shift that will happen with the next web, the decentralized web, or do you think it's a pipe dream? I mean, it's a real question.
I think it is possible because of what Charlie said. Because I think we will start to be able to allow individuals to generate wealth or income with their data, with their permission. And so it's not about money going to a advertiser, Facebook or whatever. It's about money that, okay, because I allow this person to give me an ad, I got X dollars, and that dollar now allows me to buy a certain service or I be used somewhere else. Then that's kind of virtual cycle happens. Whereas today, if you're just saying, okay, you have to take money out of your pocket that didn't exist somewhere else, I got to work for something and take that to buy a service. That's a tougher question.
Get into the core of the creator economy, which is interesting.
There are 2 ways.
I think everybody becomes a creator. That's the difference.
Yeah, but everyone can also have their own token. Alternatively, we can incentivize people to engage more because, in an example of the Roblox, there were so many people who saw that, and then, of course, the appreciation goes back to...
I think it's terrifically aspirational. I just question
it's a freemium model. You can also sell
reality
merch around
of
that.
it actually
It
happening.
works very well in terms of the
shift
sale.
required for that to happen. It's a very
pretty
good point. So actually, we're going to have to end it there because we're out of time, but I wish we could keep going. We didn't get to all of our questions. We got on a lot of fascinating stuff. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.